Hello, everyone. This is Piero San Giorgio. It is my pleasure to have again Dmitry Orlov. I'm trying to pronounce it correctly this time. Dmitry, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. What an exciting times we're living.
It certainly is an exciting time.
So you're now living in Russia, near St. Petersburg. How do you see from Russia all the crazy things that are happening in the world, but perhaps also in Russia too?
It's hard to take in the entire world at the same time, but things are fairly calm in Russia. The economy is good. People are pretty well adapted to the new situation of these viral waves. People are still hoping that this is going to come to an end at some point soon. But generally, people are just living their lives. The only real change is that the foreign tourism is gone. It's pretty much all domestic tourism now. So the popular spots in Crimea and in Yalta tend to be mobbed these days. And it's generally pretty difficult to find accommodation in any of the popular places because all the people who used to travel abroad for vacation are now looking for opportunities for tourism closer to home within the Russian Federation, which is plenty of space. It's 1/6 of the planet's dry surface, but half of that is permafrost, so that doesn't really count. But there are plenty of places to go. It's just not really set up for tourism. So people are trying to remedy that.
Now, from the West, it is difficult to assess how much the Russian governments, I guess, there's the federal and the oblasts and the cities, how much they actually are convinced about all these measures on the virus, on the vaccines, or how much they play along, and to what extent even the vaccines that are available in Russia are having effects that are so negative as we can see in the West. So I wonder what's your point of view on that?
Well, there was a wave of anti-vaccine propaganda in Russia. A lot of that turned out to be foreign financed. And it made people really mad that basically foreigners tried to basically prevent Russians from avoiding disease, basically causing harm to the Russian population. There was a bit of an effort to get rid of that sort of propaganda, and now you can actually get investigated, and I don't know how many people have gone to jail, but theoretically you can even get some jail time for spreading disinformation about COVID. And to some extent that's healthy because there was a period of time when everybody was suddenly a virologist and an epidemiologist. Before that they were just some idiots who thought they knew something about the economy. But now they suddenly started holding forth on what mRNA is and whether it edits your genome and nonsense like that. And then, of course, they added 5G and microchips and Bill Gates and all kinds of other crap. And, pretty soon, people who tried to get some information this way were just pretty much going insane. So in addition to COVID, which took 500,000 lives since the beginning, just in Russia, since the beginning of the epidemic, there are a lot of people suffering from depression, loss of sleep, weight loss, all kinds of psychiatric problems that shouldn't really be there. But as far as the vaccine, the Russian vaccine, unlike the experimental ones being used in the West are tried and true. You know, the adenovirus vector vaccine has been in use for decades. All that they've changed is the payload, which generates the spike protein, which is then expressed on the surface of certain cells so that the immune system can recognize them and get trained to deal with them. And it seems like a fairly, it seems like a perfectly safe procedure. And a good sign of that is that it was first used on all of the government, all of the medical staff virtually, and the entire armed forces. And if there were to be problems that affected these categories of people, they would be the first to recognize the problem, but it doesn't seem like there's a problem. And so the only new element there is that the vaccines, the vaccination program is not mandatory. Back in the Soviet days, if the government told you to get vaccinated, if there was a smallpox epidemic, for instance, or bubonic plague or whatever, polio, you just lined up and got vaccinated because it wasn't up to anyone who, except for the medical practitioners, to decide whether that was the right thing to do or not. But now it's left to everyone's discretion, and it's turning out that their discretion is not very discreet and based on faulty information. As far as Western vaccines, I'm fairly appalled that a company like Pfizer, which makes Viagra, suddenly is making vaccines, experimental ones, and not really making them, but just licensing them from a company that doesn't make vaccines either. And it's a German company, if you know, that was researching something having to do with cancer.
Yes.
Suddenly started making this experimental vaccine and trying to get $100 a dose for it. Of course, they got tugged down from that number, but they're still making an obscene amount of money from an unknown product, and spending a lot of money on lawyers, making sure that there's no liability. Doesn't sound good to me. You know, that just doesn't sound good. I'm sorry, I don't have specific information, but a Viagra company selling vaccines, trying to get $100 a pop from, buying them from some fly-by-night German outfit that never made a vaccine before, sounds terrible. Mm-hmm. Just the appearance of impropriety is overwhelming.
Now, this crisis that is almost 2 years old happens at a time when the West is, at least United States and most of Europe, are bankrupt. As you've chronicled in your books and in your blog for many years, the resources situation is also quite dire in the West. We don't produce much energy, except perhaps Canada or parts of America. And all of this is happening also at a time when the political stability and the cohesion of the population in the West, as you also chronicled, is has reached catastrophic levels and also deep into the ridiculous aspect of that. Now, it strikes me that this is very opportune. I mean, now it could be a coincidence or not. What's your point of view towards the opportunity of this crisis?
Well, I think that the level of degradation and degeneration in the governing elites in the West has reached a level where they're not people you can talk to. That is, it's getting to a point where countries that are run by serious professional types, like Russia, like China, like quite a few other countries actually in the world, that are run by serious, dedicated men, patriots of their country. They look at Boris Johnson, for instance, or they look at Emmanuel Macron, and they don't see somebody they can talk to. Mm. And then if you look at the discourse that's being perpetuated in Western media, It's basically tired old falsehoods being recycled endlessly. And the most worrying aspect for me, from my point of view, is that, well, you know, the entire military structure of the West, of NATO, its pinnacle is at the Pentagon. And the Pentagon is this, at this point, this two-headed monster. There's Austin and Milley. Milley just knows that it would be a really bad idea to do anything at all. So as soon as there's any kind of a rhetoric that might lead to a shooting war, he gets on the phone to anybody who would listen, be it Putin or Xi, and say, listen, no matter what orders they give me, there will be no war. Believe me, please believe me. And then there's Austin, this character from who played a role in Tim Burton's movie Mars Attacks, if you remember. He was the black general in Mars Attacks. And now he's running the Pentagon, and he thinks that he's about to go to war against the Soviet Union. He actually went in front of journalists the other day and saying, well, if there's a war with the Soviet Union, then blah, blah, blah. You know, his brain is in a jar that, you know, and the sell-by date on the jar is 30 years past. You know, that seems like a very dangerous situation to me, just because of potential accidents. But in terms of actual opportunities for war, I think that anybody who would actually be involved in fighting a war knows very well that it's a really bad idea to even think in that direction. So all we're likely to have is little provocations, little annoyances, and there'll be some reaction to those annoyances. But hopefully serious, dangerous situations will be avoided.
Now, we hear a lot of misinformation. As I told you, I do come to Russia fairly enough, and my girlfriend who lives here, she's Russian, so she goes often back, and so I have a little bit of a view of both sides. And certainly, what we are told by media in Europe is a propaganda of even worse quality and complete insanity in terms of fact, worse than the one I remember when I was a young man in the 80s or a kid in the 70s about the Soviet Union. I wonder how much they're trying to push the narrative, and as you said, the same against China. China and Russia seem to be the boogeyman today for the West, and we've seen diplomatic actions by the US recently. And as you said, the military, I know, are against any real action. However, politicians have this tendency to bring peoples to war whenever there is a crisis, and war is a way traditionally to focus the people against a common enemy. However, I don't see people buying into this story, and certainly there's no homogeneity anyway in the West anymore. Why would a Moroccan immigrant in France, or a Turkish immigrant in Germany, or a Somali in UK go to war against Russia for NATO? I mean, how much more insane do you think this propaganda would go, especially about Ukraine and Russia?
Well, the Ukraine I can speak to specifically, because basically at this point they're just on their knees begging for Russia to invade. Because if Russia doesn't invade really soon and start feeding them and supplying them with energy and electricity and food, then they'll basically starve in the cold. They are basically a failed state that is now degenerating very, very quickly. It'll be a lights out situation in a matter of weeks. Previously, they were buying electricity from Russia, but then because they're insane nationalists in charge there to some extent, they banned the purchase of electricity from Russia. And now they're buying electricity from Belarus at extravagant prices, but that's going to come to an end too. They have about 2 weeks of coal left. They had 15 nuclear reactors left over from the Soviet times that they've been running flat out. One of them has just tripped because of a safety trigger, and they have to shut it down for maintenance now. They have cut their ties to Rosatom, which previously provided the expertise for keeping these installations going. Instead, they've entered agreements with the bankrupt Westinghouse, which is incapable of building a reactor anywhere at all or maintaining the Soviet ones or anything. So the Ukraine is really a country with a completely dysfunctional government and a dysfunctional infrastructure with lots of criminals dismantling it as fast as they want, because basically they want to steal the last piece before getting on their private jet and leaving the country forever. That's their plan. That's the whole plan for the entire Ukrainian oligarchy, is to basically be the last to leave and to steal that very last piece. To give you a concrete example, you know, the gas pipeline that runs through the Ukraine to the west is probably going to be shut down because it's too old and it's not worth maintaining. It's very inefficient. The pumping equipment is not worth maintaining anymore, given that there are much newer, more efficient pipelines running now that basically use new compressor technology, basically jet engines that run on gas. And so it's going to be shut down, but it's still running today. There's still some gas going through it, maybe a third capacity, something like that. I don't know the latest numbers, but something like that. But they've been cutting up redundant pieces of it for scrap and selling the scrap metal already. That is, they're cannibalizing their pipeline network even as it's running, because they just can't stop themselves from stealing every last bit of their country.
Wow. So the Ukrainian people will definitely, that's why they will welcome some more support. Now, there are a group of, well, like, I want to make this a broader question. I wanted to say, okay, there are extreme nationalistic people bordering on the, not even bordering, even some are full Nazi accoutrement and behavior. But generally speaking, in the West, the comprehension of what is happening might not be as clear as for the Ukrainian people. Predictions of the future are difficult to make, of course, but how do you see this winter and maybe the next 6 months playing out with these crises are piling up and piling up and piling up? And do you see this going on for much longer? And if not, what could happen?
Well, I see this winter very difficult to predict, because there are a lot of infrastructure failures that could happen throughout Europe. It's a given that this will happen in the UK, which has really hollowed out its energy infrastructure. It's already happening. It's a given that this will happen in the Ukraine as well. I don't know about the rest of Europe, but this doesn't really bode well for the immediate future of Europe in general. And so it's hard to predict, but I think there'll be a lot of discontent, a lot of public discontent in the coming months, much more severe than anything we've seen so far. I think there's a huge opportunity for that.
Now, discontent can be allowed to, once again, we go back to, it can be either crushed, it can be they can try to canalize it to something else. War is often a possibility, but as you said, it will not be successful. Um, don't you know? You wrote this excellent book, "The Five Stages of Collapse," and I have this impression that, especially in the West, a sizable proportion of the people are apathetic, numb, and are not protesting and are not moving. Do you think this is going to be something that will change, or do you think anyway the majority is not what matters? It's the minorities that act that change things.
I think a lot of people will remain numb and will just basically wait for the lights to go back on and for somebody to show up and feed them. They'll just be afraid to leave their houses, really. And if you look at Western Europe, it's basically a very tame, largely elderly population of people who were born there, you know, the native population, and a lot of younger and much more restless newcomers. And it's those younger, restless newcomers who will basically take advantage of the systemic weakness that they see around them. You know, what they see is that there's nobody to punish them no matter what they do. And that they'll start taking advantage. To some extent, that's already been happening, and that could just get progressively worse.
It can. And as the United States, with all these woke and even companies are, I want to say, are going broke, but before they go broke, they go woke. Do you see the West being perceived still as a serious economy and power from your point of view in Russia? Aren't the people surprised by what is happening to us?
Well, there are two elements to it. One is that the European population is very much accustomed to living beyond its means by printing money, by playing various kinds of financial games, by enjoying the last bit of its dominant position within a capitalist system that has no more growth potential and is therefore morbid and you know, near death. Basically continuing to play a confidence game. So they have to be handled carefully because they still have a lot of things that have to be basically taken away from them. You know, they have an industrial sector that produces some key items that industry needs. Russia is busy building factories, and that can't be done without input from all kinds of companies from throughout Western Europe. What's left of them? Now, basically, the intellectual capital and some of the equipment, you know, has to be rescued and moved to a place where production can resume, because in Russia, there's still plenty of opportunities for growth and lots of cheap energy and skilled labor. So that has to be all handled delicately and with tact and compromise. And it's rather difficult to do when you have a bunch of idiots in government running around creating panics and mayhem and threatening war, which they have no idea what that involves. You know, generally when you threaten war, you have to have some idea of how to win one. Like, sane people don't go to war to lose. That's a given. So by that definition, everyone in NATO and everyone in Western Europe is stark raving insane. What they're trying to do is commit suicide by Russia. And Russia is not going to deal with that sort of mental deficiency. You know, it just won't talk to those mental defectives. And that's been declared. You know, the foreign minister, Lavrov, and Putin said, there's nobody to talk to in the West. Well, there really is. You know, but that's the business community. Those are the people who own the plant and equipment. And you know, if you notice, they all show up in droves for the St. Petersburg Economic Forum every year and sign lots and lots of deals because they know that basically there's nothing left for them to do in Western Europe. They have to move it all to Russia. China is full up already too. So Russia is the only play really. There are factories being opened in Russia every month, lists of them, long list of them. I'm on a mailing list for all of that. I get tired just scrolling through it. There's a lot happening. So basically, Western Europe is being hollowed out. All of that is going to Russia. And in the meantime, the idiots in government are making lots of noise, which we have to carefully ignore.
Yes. From the Russian point of view, if you look east to China and generally speaking, Asia, do you see the growing business, the growing partnerships with those that area of the world? And also, do you see tensions that there could be also suicide by China or not?
Well, no, because these are two fairly ancient civilizations. Russia is an inheritor of the nomadic steppe Eurasian civilization that has always been north of China and has always had a symbiotic relationship with China. Now it's a different civilization because it's a different landscape that is incompatible with the way China works, the way Chinese civilization works, which has for the past, 6,000 years has been a settled civilization. Can't deal with this nomadic way of existence. And so basically, you know, there's been a back and forth going on thousands of years. You know, the Chinese have never really made inroads north of their northern border. On the other hand, Genghis Khan pretty much just conquered China for a while, ruled Korea for a few centuries. So it's the Chinese that might have something to worry about as far as the Russian civilization encroaching on them, but I don't think that's going to happen either. As far as China encroaching on Russia, no, they're not interested in that. They haven't been interested in that for thousands of years.
No, I meant is the West going to do suicide by China? But what your points are very interesting, nonetheless.
Well, I don't think the West is going to do anything at all. Basically, there's going to be a lot of noise, and then when Taiwan suddenly votes to join peacefully, to join the mainland, there'll be a lot of hand-wringing and accusations flying about, you know, who lost Taiwan, and then nothing will happen.
Great. What are your next plans in terms of books or writing? People can still find you on cluborlov.com, if I'm correct.
Well, no, cluborlov.com is owned by a company that has disappeared as far as I know. So right now I'm still on Blogspot, cluborlov.blogspot.com, but I'm no longer updating that. So everything's moved to WordPress. So it's cluborlov.wordpress.com, where I mostly publish teasers, you know, the beginning of each article, but the bulk of each article is mostly behind paywalls, where there's a lively discussion usually, and much better atmosphere than on the open internet. Plus I get a little bit of money for it. So that's where I publish almost every week, and we'll continue doing so.
So I am subscribed to your Patreon account. So it's Patreon / Club Orlov or Dmitry Orlov, can't remember.
/Orlov.
/Orlov. I will put it anyway in the description. Any new books coming out in the next few months?
No, not really. I'm thinking of striking out in some completely new directions. I've been you know, I'm a linguist by training in addition to various other things. And I have, my son is in school here in Russia, and English is still a required subject here in school. They got rid of it in China, which seems like a reasonable thing, but it's still mandatory in Russia. And the way it's being taught is really not useful for anything, if I may be so bold. And so I'm thinking of having something to do with that. Maybe trying to reform it, professionalize it, as it were, so that, you know, kids have a choice. Either you know, learn English, in which case that's what you specialize in, or just don't bother with it at all, because what's the use of knowing English badly?
For sure. Interesting. Interesting. Well, I'm sure you will do something quite unique. Well, Dmitry, thank you very much for your time. I will put all the links on how to reach you in the description. And let's hope that nothing really bad will happen this winter for all of us.
Yes, I hope so too.
Because as they say, Russia doesn't start wars, but they do finish them. So let's hope it's okay. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.